My brother has dead for 42 years ago. We buried him in a closed casket in March of 1983 after a bus went off an icy mountain road. I was there. I signed the papers. I watched my father shake hands with the pastor and accept casseroles from neighbors who whispered, "No parent should have to bury a child." I've spent my entire adult life learning how to say that sentence without choking on it. My brother Tommy died when he was 19. Last Tuesday at 2:03 a.m. in the morning my phone rang. At 65 years old, you don't get many good calls at that hour. My first thought was my heart. My doctor had changed my medication. My second thought was my daughter, who drives home late from the hospital after night shifts. My throat tightened before I even picked up. Unknown numbers, local area codes. I almost let it go to voicemail. My wife Karen was asleep beside me, breathing soft and steady. The house was silent. Streetlights leaked weak orange through the curtains. Something in my chest said, "Answer it." I slid my finger across the screen. Hello. Static, then slow, heavy breathing. Hello, I said again, already annoyed now. Who is this? A man's voice came through the line. Rough, like someone who smoked too much or shouted for a living. But under the gravel there was something. A shape I recognized, the way you recognize a song from 3 notes. "Daniel," he asked, "is this Daniel Carr?" My spine went rigid. Nobody calls me Daniel. I'm Dan to everyone but my mother, and she's been gone 10 years. "Who's asking?" I said. My mouth had gone dry. My hand was shaking so hard the phone knocked softly against my ear. Long breath in my ears. It's Tommy." For a second I thought I'd misheard. Like when you wake up too fast and dreams cling to you. "What did you say?" I whispered. "It's Tommy," he said again, slower, like the name itself hurt his tongue. "Your brother." My heart started pounding so loud I could barely hear him. My vision narrowed. There was a roaring in my ears like distant traffic. "That's not funny," I said. "Whoever you are, this isn't a joke." "I know," he replied quietly. "It's not a joke. I found something, a newspaper clipping, a picture of me. But the name under it says Thomas Carr and Daniel. I think that's me." My free hand clutched the edge of the mattress. I could feel my wedding ring digging into my palm. My brother was buried. I saw the casket go into the ground. I also heard my father's voice in my head, clear as if he were standing beside the bed again, the way he used to be when I was young. "Some things are better left buried, son." Back then, I never questioned what he meant. On the phone, the stranger who called himself my dead brother whispered, "Please don't hang up." And for the first time since 1983, I let myself think something I'd never dared to think before. What if we buried the wrong boys? I had no idea that answering that call would not only bring my brother back, it would destroy everything I thought I knew about my father. My name is Daniel Carr. I'm 65 years old. Husband, father of 2, retired high school math teacher. I live in the same small town in British Columbia where I grew up, where everyone still knows whose kid you were even if your hair's gone white. For most of my life, I've been Bill Carr's boy. My father, William Carr, was a big man in a small town, high school principal for 30 years. Rotary Club, church elder, board member of the credit union. He wore pressed shirts, spoke in full sentences, and believed in 3 things: God, hard work, and reputation. He was the kind of man people trusted to run meetings and break up fights. He was also the kind of man who could shut you down with a single look. Growing up, there were 3 of us: me, my little brother Tommy, and reputation. Tommy was different. He laughed louder, got into more trouble. He skipped class, played guitar in the basement, came home smelling like cigarette smoke when he was 16. My dad called him a disappointment more than he ever called him son. Me, I did the opposite. I made honor roll, mowed lawns, stayed invisible. Somewhere deep down, I thought if I stayed good enough, I'd make up for Tommy. On January 14, 1983, a Greyhound bus left the highway on a snowy mountain pass. 17 dead, 2 unidentified bodies. One of the names on the list of the missing was my brother's. He was on his way back to college after winter break. 42 years later, I still remember the smell of the morgue, bleach and metal and something underneath that never really leaves your nose. I remember standing under fluorescent lights, 23 years old, trying to be the man my father expected. They pulled back a sheet. There was a body. It was swollen and bruised, hair matted with dried blood, lips pale. The left side of the face was ruined. "Don't look too long," my father said quietly. Just do your duty, son." I looked. I saw brown hair, roughly Tommy's build, a scar on the left forearm. "That's him," I said. It felt like someone else was talking. My dad put a hand on my shoulder hard enough to hurt. "You're sure?" he asked. I nodded. He squeezed once like a stamp of approval. Then he turned to the coroner and said, "That's my boy, that's Thomas." I never forgot the way his voice didn't crack. In our town, my father became the man who buried his youngest. There's a scholarship in his name, a plaque in the school lobby, in memory of Principal William Carr, a pillar of our community. I built my life on the version of the story he told us. And until that call at 2 a.m., I never dared to wonder what piece he'd left out. Because if Tommy was somehow alive, that didn't just mean the morgue had made a mistake. It meant my father had. Or he hadn't made a mistake at all. Most mornings, my life is painfully ordinary. I wake up before the alarm, my knees ache when I stand. I make coffee, black for me with cream for Karen. We sit at the kitchen table we've had for 25 years, watching the sun come up over the same street I walked down as a kid. From our kitchen window, if you lean just right, you can see the steeple of the church where we held my brother's funeral. On quiet days, you can hear the bells. There's a framed photo on top of the bookshelf in our living room. My parents, young and smiling on the cabin dock. Me at 11, skinny and serious. And Tommy, 15, throwing his arm around my neck and pulling me into a headlock as my mother laughed. To visitors, it just looks like an old family photo. To me, it's a picture of a moment right before everything went wrong. After the funeral, life didn't stop, of course, it just changed shape. My mother shrank somehow, she stopped singing while she did the dishes. Stared out the window more, my father grew larger. The house became quieter, but his presence got louder. Your mother is fragile, he'd say. We don't bring up Tommy, we move forward. Moving forward meant going to college, then coming back to town to teach. My dad arranged the interview with the principal who replaced him. You won't get special treatment, he told me, right before they offered me the job. He was proud of me. He told me that twice in my life when I got hired and when his scholarship fund reached a certain amount. We visited the cemetery every year on the anniversary of the crash. My mother used to bring flowers. After she died, I kept going alone. The headstone is simple. Thomas William Carr, 1964–1983. Gone too soon. The plot beside him is my father's. He's been there 8 years. His stone is larger, it has more words. People still stop me in the grocery store to tell me stories about him. Your dad helped me get my GED. Your father talked the judge into giving my boy a second chance. He was a good man. Sometimes I believe them. Sometimes I almost feel guilty for the cold knot in my stomach whenever someone says his name. Because there were other scenes they never saw. The night in 1982 when Dad came home from a school board meeting, jaw clenched, and told Tommy he was an embarrassment. The whispered argument behind their bedroom door. My mother sobbing, he's just a boy, Bill, and my father hissing, boys don't do what he did. He never told me what that was. I didn't ask, I was 17, and in our house, not asking was a form of loyalty. Years later, I found out there'd been some kind of incident at school. Rumors about my brother, a girl, something that would have looked bad for my father as principal. Then the crash happened and all of that vanished under a tidal wave of sympathy. God works in mysterious ways, people told my parents at the funeral. I remember thinking, even then, that if that was God's way, I wanted no part of it. I thought the past was sealed in stone and yellowing newspaper clippings. And then the man who called himself my dead brother told me he was in Vancouver, and my whole, careful, quiet life tipped sideways. I didn't sleep after that call. Karen woke up when she felt me shaking. Dan, what is it? Her voice was thick with sleep. I have to go to Vancouver, I heard myself say. It sounded ridiculous out loud. Now. She blinked at the clock. It's 2 in the morning. What happened? Did something happen to Claire? I opened my mouth to lie, to say work thing or old friend or anything that sounded normal. Instead, what came out was Tommy called. The look on her face was the same one I'd felt inside. A flinch, a small step back. Dan, she whispered, Tommy is. I know what he is, I snapped, too sharp, then I softened. I know, but someone knew things they shouldn't, and if there's even the smallest chance. My hands were still trembling, I held them up like evidence. I have to see, I won't be able to breathe if I don't see. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once. That's the thing about being married almost 40 years. Sometimes the person you love says something insane, and you still hand them the car keys. Call me when you get there, she said, and Dan's. Oh yeah. If it's not him, we'll handle it together. The drive to Vancouver in the dark was a blur of headlights and snow poles and old memories. I turned the radio off because every song sounded like something from the 80s. Every bend in the highway felt like it might be the one where the bus went over. What if it's some scammer, I thought, someone who wants money, someone who dug up old records. But then he'd said my full name, Daniel. He'd mentioned a scar on his arm he didn't remember getting. He said he dreamed of blueberry pancakes. My mother used to make those every Sunday. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the shelter he'd named, a squat, tired building near East Hastings, my stomach was in knots. Inside, it smelled like bleach and sweat and coffee. People were slumped in chairs, heads down. A woman at the front desk looked up when I approached. I'm looking for someone, I said. He called me this morning, said his name was Tommy, tall, maybe gray hair. She studied me, then nodded. Yeah, he wouldn't stop pacing after that call, kept saying he's coming, my brother coming, he's in the common room. My legs went strangely numb as I walked down the hall. I felt like I was moving underwater. The man sitting alone at the far table looked older than me, gray hair to his shoulders, beard trimmed unevenly, shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear into himself. His hands were wrapped around a styrofoam cup. Tommy, I said. He turned. For a second, my brain refused to make sense of what I was seeing. The face was wrong, two-lined, nose slightly crooked like it had been broken, new scars. But underneath the years and the damage, there was a shape I knew, the curve of his jaw, the set of his eyebrows. His eyes were what undid me, brown with specks of gold. Our mother used to say both her boys had their father's eyes. Daniel, he whispered. I couldn't speak, my throat closed. I stared at the man I'd buried 42 years ago. He stood up slowly as if every joint hurt. He was shorter than I remembered, thinner, but he moved with a familiar shuffle like his left ankle bothered him. Tommy sprained that ankle jumping off the dock when he was 16. You came, he said. I grabbed the back of a chair because my knees felt like they might give out. Show me your arm, I managed, your left arm. He pushed up his sleeve. There it was, a pale, jagged line about 4 inches long running along his forearm. Tommy got that scar when he was 7, crashing his bike into the neighbor's fence, 12 stitches. I'd held his hand in the ER while he screamed at the doctor. My head spun. If this man was lying, he'd done impossible research. You could be anyone, I said, my voice shaking. You could have found all this. I know, he said. That's why I called you. I don't remember anything before about 15 years ago, but I found that article, I saw that face. And it felt like looking at a ghost in the mirror. He looked at me like I was holding his fate in my hands. If you're really my brother, I said, then something is very, very wrong with the story we were told. My father's face flashed in my mind, standing in the morgue, hand on my shoulder. You're sure, son? For the first time in 4 decades, I let myself answer honestly. No. We went to a coffee shop because I needed something solid in my hands or I was going to shake apart. He kept his head down as we walked, like he was afraid someone might recognize him. The idea that anyone would was absurd. He looked like half the men on those streets, worn out by weather and life. What do you remember? I asked once we sat. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone older. He wrapped his fingers around the mug so tightly his knuckles turned white. His nails were chewed down, his hands were calloused. Bits and pieces, he said. Waking up in a hospital 15 years ago, they told me. No ID, no idea who I was. They said I'd been beaten, left in an alley. They patched me up and discharged me to a shelter. And before that, I asked. He shook his head slowly. Shadows, snow, cold, I dream of sliding like I'm in a car or a bus, people screaming, and sometimes a house with white siding and a red door, blueberry pancakes. He laughed once, short and incredulous. I thought I made that up. My mother painted our front door red the summer I turned 10. She said it made the house look less like all the others on the block. I felt sick. We need proof, I said. This can't just be memory and scars, a DNA test. We do that, we'll know. His eyes flicked up to mine, they were wet. If it says we're brothers, what then? I didn't have an answer. We found a private lab that could do rush sibling testing. It felt surreal, like checking into a hotel. Papers, signatures, a swab against the inside of my cheek. He winced like he thought the little cotton stick might hurt. 48 hours, the tech said. We'll call with results. Do you want them phoned or emailed? Both, I said too quickly. Walking back to the car, my thoughts started circling something I'd never really examined. The morgue's the body, my father's. They asked me to identify him. I told the man who might be my brother as we waited at a crosswalk. But Dad stood right behind me. He told me not to look too long. He said it was gruesome and your mother doesn't need details. I remembered how his hand had pressed down on my shoulder when I opened my mouth to say I wasn't sure. You weren't sure? The man beside me asked quietly. I stopped walking. I was 23 and in shock, I said. The face was ruined, hair was right, build was right. There was a scar where yours should be. They said they'd matched his wallet, but the crash, there was fire, metal everywhere. How sure can you be in a room like that? A memory floated up, one I hadn't thought about in years. My mother's voice hoarse in the kitchen the night after we went to the morgue. You don't know it was him, Bill, she'd sobbed. You didn't let me see him, you didn't let me look. My father's reply low and sharp. I spared you, you should be grateful. Why didn't you want her to see? I whispered now. The man next to me looked confused. Your dad, he sounds like he was strict. I almost laughed, that's one word. We checked into a cheap hotel with 2 beds. I paid. He stared at the TV like he wasn't sure what to do with it. When he went to shower, I sat on the edge of my bed and buried my face in my hands. 42 years of certainty were collapsing in my chest like a building with its supports kicked out. I remembered another scene suddenly, my father in his recliner 2 years after the crash. A whiskey in his hand he thought I didn't know about. If he hadn't done what he did to that girl, Dad muttered, staring past me, none of this would have happened. What girl? I asked. He looked at me like I'd crossed a line. Don't dig, Daniel, the boy's dead. We don't drag our name through the mud over a dead boy. Back then, shame flushed my face. I thought he was protecting us. Now, with a possible living brother in the shower down the hall, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like something else entirely. The next afternoon, my phone rang. Mr. Carr, a woman's voice said, "This is the lab calling with your results." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. The man on the other bed sat up, watching my face like his life depended on it. Yes, I said, this is Daniel. The probability of full siblingship between you and the other tested individual is greater than 99.9%, she said. Genetically speaking, you share both biological parents. The room tilted, my free hand dug into the bedspread. So he's my brother, I asked anyway. Yes, sir, there is no reasonable doubt. As I thanked her, I hung up. I looked across the room at the man who had my mother's eyes and my father's jaw. It's you, I said, you're Tommy. He laughed, then covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. I felt something crack open in my chest, joy, grief, horror all tangled together. And underneath it, cold and sharp, was one thought. Then who the hell did we bury? We drove back to my town together. Tommy, I was still getting used to saying his name out loud, sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the trees like they were part of a movie he'd walked into halfway through. I feel like I'm stealing someone's life, he said quietly at one point, like I snuck into a theater. It's yours, I said, the words felt heavy. It was always yours, we just didn't know where you were. The truth was uglier, we hadn't looked. At home, Karen hugged him longer than he seemed to know how to handle. My grown kids came over that weekend. There were tears, awkward jokes, a lot of staring. My grandson climbed into Tommy's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Feels like I skipped a few chapters, Tommy murmured. For a week we tried to pretend this was just a miracle story. Brother lost, brother found. God works in mysterious ways, right? Then the questions started to crowd out the gratitude. Tommy had nightmares. He'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, insisting he was buried in snow, that someone was pulling him, shouting his name. Once half awake, he whispered, "Dad said nobody would believe me anyway," and my whole body went cold. "Dad," I repeated, "you remember Dad's." He rubbed his temples. I see him, sometimes not clear, angry, red in the face, saying I'd ruined everything, saying if this gets out, I'm finished. That didn't sound like the grieving father on the scholarship brochure. I started with the easy stuff, public records. I went to the town library, dug out microfilm, watched old headlines roll past on the screen. Tragic bus crash claims 17 lives. Local principal loses son in highway disaster. Community rallies around CARR family. I remembered those photos. My father standing stiffly in a black suit, my mother half hidden behind him, my own face turned away. But buried deeper in the January papers, I found other articles. Ones I hadn't read as a teenager because my father always had the paper first. Allegations rock high school. Student accused of inappropriate contact with fellow pupil. The name wasn't printed, both were minors, but the dates lined up. Mid-December 1982, anonymous sources mentioned the principal's own son being involved in an incident that may have consequences for his father's position. The follow-up story a week later said the matter had been handled internally, and no further disciplinary action would be taken. 2 weeks after that, my brother supposedly died. I sat in the dim library, the machine humming softly, my hands clenched in my lap. Dad used to rant about baseless accusations and gold-digging families. I'd assumed he meant other kids. I never knew he was talking about his own son. I requested a copy of the coroner's report on the crash. It took a few days. When it arrived, the language was clinical, almost bored. Male, approximate age 18-22, trauma to head and torso, dental records not available, identification confirmed by family member and personal effects. Cause of death, blunt force trauma in motor vehicle collision. Personal effects: burned wallet with partially legible ID. Name Thomas R. The rest was scorched. I stared at the scanned page. My father had always said they were absolutely sure. A detail caught my eye. Under identifying marks, the coroner had written, scar on left forearm approx. 4 cm. Several healed fractures in right wrist and 2 ribs. Tommy broke his wrist falling out of a tree when he was 12. That matched. I flipped to the final page. There was a note in different handwriting. Mother declined to view remains. Father insisted closed casket. Identification affirmed by older brother. I could feel my own name hovering there, invisible ink. I remembered my mother begging to see her boy one last time and my father putting his arm around her and saying, "You don't want that image in your head, Ruth." It had sounded kind back then. I started asking questions around town, carefully. Most people gave me pitying looks. "You've been through a lot, Dan, maybe don't dredge it up." A few lowered their voices and said things like, "Your dad did what he had to, hard times." One person didn't tell me to move on. Officer Mark Jensen had been the youngest cop on the force in 1983. He was long retired now, hair gone, belly soft, but his eyes were still sharp. He lived alone in a little bungalow with too many framed police commendations on the walls. "I wondered when this day would come," he said when I told him Tommy was alive. You knew," I stammered. He shook his head slowly. "Didn't know, but I had questions. Your dad made sure nobody asked them out loud." He told me about the night of the crash. How the initial report said 2 bodies were too damaged to identify. How the coroner suggested waiting for dental records. How my father arrived at the morgue the next day, jaw set, insisting he didn't want my mother anywhere near that horror show. He went in, came out 5 minutes later, said, "That's my boy, that's Thomas," Jensen said. When we mentioned dental records, he got heated, said, "I know my own son," and started in about the mother's fragile nerves, how the family needed closure. "And nobody pushed back?" I asked. "Your father was the principal, Daniel," he said. "Half the force had kids in his school. He'd helped a lot of people. We all felt sorry for him. Nobody wanted to prolong the family's suffering. The bus company wanted it settled. Insurance wanted a death certificate." Jensen's mouth twisted. "Convenience is a hell of a drug." He leaned forward. "Your dad came to the station a week later after the funeral," Jensen added. "He told my chief that any rumors about your brother's incident were to be shut down out of respect. He said the boy had suffered enough. He said, Thomas is gone and that's the end of it." "Was it?" I asked. My voice sounded far away. Jensen held my gaze for a long beat. "For him, maybe," he said. "For the rest of you, I'm not so sure." As I walked back to my car, the world felt tilted. The story I'd been handed my whole life, tragic accident, heroic father, was starting to look more like a cover story. And the one man who could answer my questions had been in the ground for 8 years. Or so I thought. "Do you remember anything about the night before the crash?" I asked Tommy one evening. We were sitting on my back deck watching the lake turn gold. He'd been living with us for a month by then. Some days he seemed almost comfortable. Other days he flinched when the doorbell rang. He frowned, tapping his fingers against his mug. "It comes in flashes," he said, "like snapshots, not a movie." "Try," I said gently. He closed his eyes. "I remember packing," he said slowly. "Mom folded my sweaters. She always did that thing where she tucked socks into the shoes so I wouldn't forget them. I remember her hugging me real tight. She smelled like that lemon stuff she used to clean with." My throat tightened. "And Dad?" I asked. His face darkened. "I remember him yelling," he said. "Not that night, maybe the night before, in his office. Door closed, but not all the way. He said, 'You've humiliated this family.' He said, 'Do you know what you've done to my career?' The girl, the allegations, the headlines." I told him I did. Tommy's voice broke. "I told him it wasn't like that. We were both stupid kids, but he didn't want to hear." He said, "If this gets out, if they print your name, everything I've built is over." I could hear our father saying it, the disgust in his voice reserved for trash and troublemakers. "What else?" I pushed. He shook his head. "I remember Mom crying. I remember him saying, 'You keep your mouth shut, Ruth. This family does not air its dirty laundry.'" He opened his eyes and looked at me. "And then I remember the bus," he whispered. "The snow, someone praying, that's it. Then waking up in a hospital with no idea who I was." I told him what I'd found, the articles, the coroner's notes, Officer Jensen's story. Tommy listened, shoulders curled inward, like he was bracing for a blow. "So he just looked at some poor kid on a slab and said it was me?" he asked. "I don't think it was that simple," I said. "I think he wanted it to be you." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. We went looking for more proofs. My mother had kept boxes. After she died, I'd put them in the attic and never gone through them. Now Tommy and I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by yellowed letters, school programs, birthday cards. In one box, tucked between old report cards, we found a thin folder labeled in my father's sharp handwriting, Thomas Incident. My hands shook as I opened it. There were photocopies of statements. The girl's parents accusing Tommy of taking advantage of their daughter after a party. The girl's own words hesitant, messy, saying she'd felt pressured. My father's official report as principal, matter handled internally. Student reprimanded and suspended, no further action required. At the bottom of the stack was a letter never sent, addressed to the school board, dated 3 days before the crash. To whom it may concern, it began. In light of recent unfounded allegations against my son, I wish to state unequivocally that Thomas has been a source of personal disgrace and professional risk to me. I have dedicated my life to this institution and will not see my career tarnished by the reckless behavior of a single boy. I swallowed hard. I don't remember writing any statement, Tommy said softly. You were a kid, I said. Dad controlled the narrative. Behind the letters was a small envelope, brittle with age. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, for Daniel if you ever need the truth. My heart tripped over itself. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My mother's words, written in blue ink that had started to fade. Daniel, if you are reading this, I'm gone and your father can't take this from me. I begged him to wait, I begged him to look again. The boy in that coffin, I didn't think it was our Tommy. The nose was wrong, the hairline. A mother knows her child's face, even hurt. Your father said grief was making me hysterical. He said the scar on the arm proved it. He said the wallet proved it. He said we needed a body for the funeral so people would stop talking about the other thing. I'm so sorry I didn't fight harder, I was so tired. Your father told me Thomas is dead to this family, one way or another. I didn't understand what he meant until later. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it really was him. But if you ever feel in your bones that something isn't right about your brother's death, trust yourself. Love, Mom. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the letter. Tommy took it from me carefully, like it might crumble. He knew, I whispered. He knew there was a chance it wasn't you, and he pushed it through anyway. He needed you dead on paper. To save his reputation, Tommy said, voice flat. We sat there in the dusty attic, the air thick with insulation and betrayal. For 42 years, my father had been the grieving hero, the man who soldiered on after tragedy, the name on a scholarship that helped disadvantaged youth. He'd also been the one who saw a kid on a slab, a kid some other mother never got to bury properly, and decided he was close enough to his own son to settle his problem. He'd told me to say yes. He'd handed me a pen to sign the identification forms. He'd let me carry that guilt so he could carry his image. The revenge I felt rising in me wasn't fiery. It wasn't loud. It was cold, it was patient. And it started with 4 words I never thought I'd say about my father. I'm going to tell. Telling the truth about a dead man everyone worships is like swinging a hammer at a stained glass window. You know it's going to be messy, you also know you can't unswing. The first people I told were my kids. We sat in our living room, the same one where they'd played with blocks, done homework, asked why Grandpa sometimes snapped at them for small things. I laid out the proof, the DNA results, the articles, Officer Jensen's account, my mother's letter. My daughter Claire rubbed her temples. So Grandpa knew it might not be Tommy and just didn't care, she asked. He cared, I said, just more about himself. My son Michael stared at the floor. This means some other family never got their kid back, he said. Tommy nodded, eyes wet. My life was traded for his, he murmured. On paper anyway. We can't fix everything, I said, feeling the weight of that. But we can stop living a lie. Next, I went to the church. The pastor who'd done my father's funeral was retired, but the current one listened as I told him everything, my voice shaking. Are you sure? He asked quietly. I slid my mother's letter across his desk. As sure as I can be, I said. And even if Dad believed he was right back then, he let the story stand when he knew there were doubts. He built his whole public image on being the man who lost a son, while he'd basically exiled that son in his own mind. The pastor sighed. People will be hurt, he said, angry. So was Tommy, I replied. For 42 years, he just didn't know why. The local paper ran the story 2 weeks later. DNA proves dead son alive, questions raised about 1983 identification. Retired principal's son says father ignored doubts in tragic case. They interviewed me, they wanted me to condemn my father. I refused to give them a soundbite like that. I loved my dad, I said. He was good to a lot of people. He also did something unforgivable. Both can be true. I watched the town react. Some people avoided my eyes at the grocery store. Others squeezed my arm and whispered, "Took courage what you did." A few posted online about smearing a dead man's name. I didn't answer them. I wasn't doing this for them. The school board called a special meeting. In the end, they voted to rename the William Carr Memorial Scholarship. It would now be the Unknown Passenger Scholarship, dedicated to the unidentified victim of the 1983 bus crash whose identity was never confirmed. They asked if they could put a line about Tommy's survival in the school's history page. Yes, I said, but don't make it a miracle story without the ugly parts. We exhumed the grave. That was the hardest day. Standing in the cemetery while men I didn't know lifted heavy stone and disturbed earth that had been settled for decades. Tommy didn't come. He spent that morning sitting on my back porch staring at the lake. "I can't watch them open a box that's supposed to be me," he said. The coroner, a different man than in '83, confirmed what we already knew. The body in my brother's grave was not genetically related to my parents. A stranger, some other family's boy. The crash records weren't detailed enough to find out who. We changed the headstone. It doesn't have a name anymore, just unknown young man's. Died January 1983. Not forgotten. My father's grave is still beside it. His stone still calls him beloved husband, devoted father, pillar of the community. I thought about adding an asterisk. I didn't, that wasn't what this was about. Revenge, it turned out, wasn't fire and shouting and overturning headstones. It was slower. It was sitting with my aunt at her kitchen table as she cried and said, "I always wondered why your father got so angry when I mentioned Tommy's name after the crash." It was watching a portrait of my father come down from the wall in the school lobby and be replaced with a simple plaque acknowledging the mistakes of the past. It was letting the town see him fully, not as a monster, not as a saint, but as a man whose fear of shame made him do something terrible. The last part of my revenge was selfish. I wrote a letter, an open one, and had the paper printed. "Dad," it began, "you taught me that a man must take responsibility for his actions, so I'm taking responsibility for mine. I signed a paper in 1983 because I trusted you. I let your version of events become the only one. I hurt my brother by not asking questions. I won't keep your secret anymore." I ended it with, "Reputation is who people think you are. Character is who you are when nobody's watching. I'm choosing character now." Tommy read it 3 times. Then he put his hand on my shoulder the same way Dad used to, except his touch was gentle. "That's better than any grave kicking," he said. He was right. It's been almost a year since that 2M phone call. If you walked past my house today, you'd see a man in his 60s on the porch, drinking coffee, and another man beside him, a little more worn around the edges, arguing about whether the Canucks are cursed. You wouldn't know they'd only just become brothers again. Tommy still goes to therapy twice a week. There are huge gaps in his memory that may never come back. Some days he remembers whole conversations from when we were kids, the time we tried to camp in the backyard and got scared by raccoons, the way Dad used to line us up for inspections before church. Other days, he looks at me like he's not entirely sure who I am. He's working part-time at a garden center now. "Plants don't care if you forget what day it is," he says. He comes home with dirt under his nails and stories about old ladies arguing over hydrangeas. My grandson thinks he's the coolest person on earth. "Granduncle Tommy showed me how to skip rocks," he announced the other day. He said every rock is just a piece of a mountain that wanted to travel. "Sounds like something you'd say," I told Tommy. He shrugged. "Maybe I remember more than I think." The town has mostly moved on. Scandals fade, even slow, quiet ones. Some people still look at me with a mix of pity and suspicion. Some treat me kinder than they did before. It's strange losing a pedestal I never asked to stand on. The hardest part is still my father. I visit the cemetery more now, not less. I stand between the unknown boy's stone and my dad's, and I talk to both of them. To the boy I say, "I'm sorry, you deserved your own name, your own story. We stole that from you because it was easier. I'm trying to put back what I can." To my father I say, "You were a good principal. You helped a lot of kids who weren't yours. You also sacrificed your own to save your pride. You taught me to be honest, but only when it suited you. Sometimes I'm so angry I can barely breathe. Other times, I remember him teaching me how to change a tire in the driveway, grease on his hands, pride in his eyes, and I miss him." Grief is messy like that. People ask me if exposing him gave me closure. The truth is there is no neat closing. This isn't a movie with triumphant music at the end. It's quieter. It's watching Tommy fall asleep on my couch during a hockey game, his mouth slightly open, the way it used to when he was 19. It's hearing him laugh with my kids in the kitchen. It's knowing that whatever years we lost, we're not lying to each other anymore. Revenge, in the end, wasn't about destroying my father. It was about refusing to let his fear shape the rest of our lives. The last time I went to the cemetery, the wind was cold. Leaves scraped along the path. I stood there longer than usual. I forgive you, I said to my father's grave. It felt strange in my mouth, but I won't excuse you, there's a difference. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was shrinking under his name. As I walked back to the car, I glanced over at the stone that used to say Thomas William Carr, and now simply marks a boy we never knew. There's a man out there living the life you were supposed to have, I murmured. He's damaged, but he's kind. He's stubborn as hell, you'd like him. I got into the car. I looked in the rearview mirror at my own face, my father's jaw, my mother's eyes, my brother's tired smile. I thought about that phone call at 2 a.m., the rough voice saying, "It's Tommy," and the way my entire world cracked open. If I hadn't answered, I would still be living in a story that wasn't true, worshipping a man who helped me build my whole life on a lie. Now when people ask why I went digging, I tell them this. Silence was my father's revenge on the world. Telling the truth is mine. And for the first time since 1983, that feels like enough. If you're still here, thanks for listening to my story. I know it was a long one. If it hit a nerve, if you've ever felt like your family hid things for your own good, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Would you have exposed what my father did or kept his secret to protect his memory? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my place, be honest. I'll be reading through them. And if you want more real stories like this, complicated, messy, emotional, but true to how people actually behave, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks again for staying with me to the end.